Don't worry, everything's going to be fine.
You lie like a rug.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 504 of the Dead Robot Society. Terry Mixon here. Joining me, Paul E. Cooley. How you doing, man?
That
was actually entirely comprehensible.
I was entirely, well, then I wasn't trying hard enough. Doing all right, man. How are you?
Doing great. If I could only finish this novel.
If you could only finish this novel. Hasn't that been the refrain for a while?
I'm 3 chapters from the end.
Bullshit.
3 chapters.
Bullshit.
It'll probably be 4 by the time I finish writing it, but 3 chapters. It's going to be close to 100,000 words because I just can't shut the fuck up.
You heard it here first, folks. Finally, an admission.
No, the problem that I ran into with this particular book is at about the 3/4 mark, I threw a couple of wrenches into the whole plot, and it's taken a little longer to undo everything and get them marching back towards where they needed to be.
I don't.
Can I blame the cats? I can blame the cats.
You can try. I don't believe it.
This is why. Right here. Meaning is the reason that this book is not done.
Right. Yeah, it's all Minnie's fault.
On the plus side, the Terra Gambit audio version is in ACX and going through the review and approval process, so a couple of weeks, it should be out.
Woohoo! Woo! Awesome.
More Veronica goodness in your ear holes.
Gee, I wish I had an audiobook out.
You know, maybe you should do something about that.
I am waiting on artwork.
But the artist is on vacation.
The artist is on vacation and has the files I need.
Wah, wah, wah.
So, yeah, I am ready to...
You can make it like a stick figure and just put it out with this like temporary thing.
Audible's not going to go with that. No, they're not going to. No, they're not going to let that happen at all.
Folks, you need to go ahead and do your own stick figure versions of what you think Paul's cover should look like and send them in.
Oh, God, thanks a lot, Terry. Oh, good. Oh, good.
If you want to hear Paul's newest book sooner, go ahead and send him a stick figure Audible cover so he can get this sucker out the door.
You'd not believe how many people are asking me, hey, man, you said the book is going to be ready. Yeah, I also said I got fucked. Anyway, I've had several really good writing days. I guess it was Saturday. I got 4,000 words. I don't remember, 4,200 words, something like that. I get 1,000 words at least on the Black 4 every day, and then I go play on Quantum Personality Disorder for a couple 3,000 words. I think today, though, while all this video is rendering, I will be in TB4 land because I've gotten to a point where I know what I need to do.
Kill everyone.
No, we're not to that part yet. The screaming and running hasn't started yet.
You know, there's a certain pattern to where your books go. It starts off slowly.
Yes.
Then there's lots of scurrying around,
yes.
And then the monster eats everyone.
That's exactly right. That's the formula. If there is a formula, that is it. So, and you know, to be fair with TB4, it's the same problem I have with the Black. I have to set all this stuff up, and then it goes off. Well, now I'm wrapping up threads for 3 books all in one. So it's going to take a little prep work. Just a little bit. So I'm almost out of that prep work. Well, I'm actually out of the prep work phase. And a few thousand words from now we're really going to start having the fun. When we get to find out new and interesting things about the Black. I have no idea.
If only they'd brought AUV5 in to solve the problem.
We'll get to that. We will get to that. Shit. You know, you're just trying to get me to say spoilers and all sorts of other shit that I didn't have to edit out in editing. Thanks a lot, you bastard.
Actually, I have no idea, so I wasn't trying to get you to confess to anything.
No, but you've been trying to get this idea in my head for at least 4 books now.
It's true. I keep putting this idea forward because I know the fans would love it.
Yeah, the first AI in the Soul and Beyond universe was AUV5.
Everybody's got to have a humble beginning.
Oh my god. Anyway, that notwithstanding, quantum personality disorder kind of took off. I don't know what happened. I just kind of picked it up and where it was, and was worried I hadn't given it enough time to percolate. And I felt like the book was moving too fast. And I just said F it and went with it. And now, for the first time in a very long time, I'm writing a book that takes place on, well, first time ever, I'm writing a book in the Derelict Saga, or the Soul and Beyond, that actually takes place on planet Earth at some point. So now I got to figure out. Now I got to figure out what all that looks like. So, yeah, things just got bogged down a little bit. So I have to describe all that. I've hinted at it in Derelict, but now I've got to kind of deal with it here. So this will be interesting, to say the least. So I'll be going through that kind of slowly now.
So which book do you think will be the next one that's e-booked?
I would think it'll be Evolution, Black 4. That's the goal. I missed July because of shenanigans, and August I think is if I keep getting 1,000 or 2,000 words a day, then it should definitely be done by the end of August, at least the first draft. So I would think that that's going to be the next one. And I want to get back to Trident. So I'll pick that up at some point. I'll throw in some Yimpox and go back into Derelict Land. Yeah. So many books, man. I get them all confused. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Once we're done recording, I've got a spoiler to share with you that you just literally sparked in my head.
Oh no. I keep having those epiphanies where I will just be thinking about something else, and then you get that voice inside your head that there's a subroutine that's been working on this problem, and the piece just fit into place, and it fired the callback and said, "Hey, dummy, your thought is ready."
You're like, was I thinking?
Was I thinking? I wasn't even thinking about that. But your brain goes, "Hey, remember that problem you were trying to solve a little earlier? Here's the answer." Ah, shit.
And it's awesome. And it's going to require another 20,000 words.
Exactly. It's going to require another 20,000 words. It's getting to be a really bad habit for us, Terry.
It's totally true.
We're both engaged in this.
I was aimed for 80,000 words, and it's going to be 100 because, this idea I had. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to my world. Well, we'll see when you get to 130K. When you get to 130K, call me.
I'm never going to get to 130K.
How about 500,000?
Do I look like Brandon Sanderson to you?
That's where Derelict is headed. The entire Derelict saga, by the time it's over with, I think it's going to be at least 500,000 words.
Let's see. I've got 9 books in the Empire series, so it's probably at 750, 800,000 words. Probably a little bit more than that. It'll cross 1 million words in that series in the next couple of books.
Isn't that terrifying?
By book 12, it will be at 1 million words.
Wow.
I hadn't thought about it in that way, but yeah, that is kind of scary.
It's very scary. Ugh.
That's, of course, if I can force myself to come back and write the damn next book, because I keep having these plot bunnies run around my head and want to write everything under the sun and don't have enough time for it.
Yeah, you're going to have to, shoot those little buggers and have a nice cookout.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Which brings us to the topic of today's show. One of those plot bunnies that wants to write itself into a novel.
No.
Yes. No. Today we're bringing on some guests, and we're going to be talking about LitRPG because I am probably going to write that damn novel.
Well, I absolutely hope you do.
It's going to be really wonky, though, the way I come at it. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, this should be fun. I think they'll discover that during the discussion here.
So let's stop wasting our listeners' time and head right into the meat of the show and our guests. Here we go. Jump right in. So joining us today, we have two special guests. We have Kevin McLaughlin, who writes LitRPG, and we have Linton Bowers, who is one of our listeners who originally posed the question about what LitRPG is. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, me too. It's an honor.
Linton, when you sent the email, I suspect it's because I've been meandering and talking about writing in that genre, and I'm still hesitant about doing so because of reasons that may come up during this particular episode. But why don't you go ahead and reiterate what you said in the email and what you're hoping happens today?
Yeah. Okay. So you can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So some of it was brought up in a previous show. I know Paul didn't. I don't think Paul really understood that the reader expectations are that it has a lot of this info that a lot of authors think is just filler, which is the game aspects of it, the game mechanics, level progression, things like that. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about what the reader expectation is of it and how we can perceive reader expectation as being the wrong thing for a book, even though that's what the readers want.
Well, that's an interesting take on it. How the readers can be wrong. We don't hear that very often.
I'm not saying they're wrong. I mean, that's what they want. That's what they're paying for. You can't be wrong if you got the money.
Well, okay, that's true.
You've written one LitRPG book. Am I correct in remembering that?
Yes, that is correct. I do have one LitRPG book out.
Okay, and Kevin's written a couple as well. Kevin, maybe you could help us with kind of defining what LitRPG actually is.
So LitRPG is at this point being seen as sort of a subgenre of GameLit, which is the broader base of a game world, game universe book storyline. LitRPG specifically is when you're playing an MMORPG in the book. It's essentially the nearest way I can describe it. That's the broadest base look at it.
And what does that acronym stand for?
Massively multiplayer online role-playing game. But the idea basically is that in some way or another, the character is a character in a virtual world game where they have progression like you would see in something like World of Warcraft. They're advancing in levels or skills in some manner. And they're making decisions about the game mechanics as well as decisions about the conflicts and encounters that they run into.
Okay. Fair enough.
I have to confess that over the last 6 months, I've probably listened to 20 LitRPG books. And I really love listening to them, reading them through audio, basically. And it's very different than anything I'd ran into before. I'm not an online video game player, but I've been a role player for decades. And hearing the characters transposed into that type of universe has always been an interesting type of fiction for me. It just never had a name until recently. How old is LitRPG and GameLit anyway? It seems fairly new.
It's fairly new. It's only a few years, like 2 or 3 years old as a term. But I mean, I remember back in something like 1980, I read a book which I think was old then called Quagmire or something like that, which was about a D&D campaign, or a role-playing game. It wasn't specifically Dungeons and Dragons. A role-playing campaign where the dungeon master used magic to throw all of the characters into the game world as their heroes. And the rest of the adventure is them having to survive the adventure so that they can get back out again, which was essentially LitRPG GameLit decades before the current iteration.
The game master in that, if I remember correctly, was a college professor. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
I've read that particular book.
Oh, I read that.
One of the characters was a thief that lost his hand fairly early on, if it's the one that I'm thinking of.
Sounds right.
So, yeah, I think that's my first entry into this particular genre of type of fiction myself. Trying to get the game mechanics in line is something I've been thinking about heavily in this, because it's not like you're writing an adventure based on a real game system. You're having to make up the stats, the type of progression that you get with skills, and it's all different in every book that I've read, every series. The game mechanics that the characters are having to deal with are always different. When you guys were writing your books, how hard was it to come up with your own set of game mechanics to define character growth?
I can say for me, really it wasn't that hard. I had an idea on the onset of what the game would be like. It was just building it out from there. I used the classic RPG system of different classes and skills and levels.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. So there's, for example, there's a novice spearman skill that gives the character the ability to wield a spear and attack enemies with a spear, which levels up and gives him more damage with increased levels.
Okay. All right. So basically, it's kind of like it literally is just basic idea of Dungeons and Dragons, you being the character, but being aware that you're in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Being aware that your game is actually a major part of what makes it that type of fiction.
Right. So it's the self-awareness of the character. It's literally breaking the fourth wall as in realities, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have read a couple of the series that I've read have had where even the natives of the world are aware that these are people from elsewhere. They may say that they're from another dimension. They may call them travelers. Yeah. Some of them even called them players. They were actually open about what they were. That seems to be fairly optional, how much awareness of the NPCs that they have during these particular books. That seems optional.
Well, you see the same sort of premise in MMORPGs as well, where in some of them you're just assumed to be a regular person from that world, and in some of them you're seen to be as somebody from elsewhere or some special avatar of somebody, where you're obviously not from there. So there's a lot of flexibility in that.
Well, Kevin, you've written other things than LitRPG. Were there any special challenges you ran into when writing Valhalla Online?
Well, the game mechanics part was actually pretty easy for me. I've got a background in game dev, so I had that experience already. The hardest part, I think, was finding a story that was enticing, that was relevant, because for me, a virtual world story where it's about something that's happening in the not real world isn't as compelling. If it's not real, it's not actually impacting things. Now, some games have come up, a lot of books have come up with really interesting ways of making it compelling, and that's, I think, one of the hardest parts about LitRPG, is finding a way to make something that's happening in this virtual or imaginary world relevant enough that the reader feels involved, feels like they can care about it.
It seems like the ones that I've read that are the most compelling are the stories where the effects in the game have real-world consequences, where the character's life may actually be in danger, where events inside the game may bleed out and affect their real world life and the people that are in the real world.
Yeah,
it's not always the case, but some of the ones that I've read that do that are very compelling.
Well, I mean, like everybody's looking at Ready Player One as being a great example of that, where you've got things. That's probably more GameLit than LitRPG because there's not the same kind of progression stuff happening, but there's definitely effects going back and forth between the real world and the virtual world in that.
Well, you could almost see the number of followers they get. I can't remember, watchers. I don't remember what it is, where folks were following their accounts as they were going through it. That's sort of a level progression, because as they did that opened up more opportunities for endorsements and everything else as they were getting into it.
That is the leveling.
So I would argue that mechanic's there. It's just very well hidden.
Mm-hmm.
It's subtle, but it's there.
One of the particular series that I read, the premise of the story was it wasn't a game, it was the real world, and what we see as our real life was actually the game. And I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition of the storyline. The characters, most of the players didn't realize that the worlds were actually reversed. It was kind of a Matrix-y sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds very, very Matrix. It's just that you're still in the pod. You're still in the pod and in the world at the same time.
The basic premise of that particular story was that aliens had fought a war with humanity and basically exterminated most of them. And they took what few humans they had left and grew their own copies and basically uploaded them into a computer so that they could use selected ones to do real world tasks in a technology-based world that was made to look like a fantasy world. It was called the Trapped Mind Project.
Oh, yeah.
And it was actually pretty good. I like that one.
Interesting books to think about. So if you marry Lit RPG with cyberpunk, but that, I mean, it sounds like in a lot of cases it is cyberpunky, as in some cases anyway, where they're using VR or something like that. What's the major difference between these two? Is it really just the game mechanics, and that's really all that makes it Lit RPG, or is there something else besides the leveling up and the game mechanics themselves?
There's definitely ties between cyberpunk and Lit RPG, but with Lit RPG, the dominant storyline is happening in the world where the progression is taking place.
Okay.
In a cyberpunk game, you might see a character going online in a virtual world and having stuff happening there, but they'd be vignettes or something to reveal or expose bits of their character. They wouldn't be the core of the story itself. It's kind of like the difference between a romantic novel and a romance novel. A romance novel has it's about the romance. If you take out the romance, there is no story anymore. Whereas you can throw a romance into a lot of other types of adventure books and spy books and all kinds of other things. And the romance is a sideline. It adds depth to the story without actually being the core of it. In Lit RPG, the core of the story is the virtual world and the progression through the virtual world to the objective in the virtual world.
Okay. All right. Now we're clear.
I think you could look at the Trapped Mind Project, where the character spends most of his time in the game, as opposed to Snow Crash, where the character spends a little time in cyberspace and most of his time in the real world.
Gotcha. All right.
One of the things that I've noticed, or I should say that I've heard about, is that, well, let me backtrack. A lot of the storylines that I've seen in Lit RPG are fantasy based, but not all. Some of them are science fiction based. Some of them are modern day, somewhat noirish based. The vast majority are fantasy, but not always. Is that how you guys see the genre? Is it mainly restricted to fantasy with a couple of offshoots in other flavors?
I think that's one of the really fun things about the genre, is that it encompasses all those other genres, right? So, like you said, you get the sci-fi, you get and if you look at GameLit as opposed to just Lit RPG, you also get other types of game mechanics like first-person shooters, and you can just have so many different options and get so many varieties of stories that still all fit into this subgenre.
I know that we talked about the difference between GameLit and Lit RPG, but could you guys maybe expand a little bit on what GameLit is explicitly?
So, GameLit is two things. Lit RPG specifically is talking about the RPG, the role-playing game part of it, where you're playing a character who has some sort of advancement from one point to another. As they go through the game, they progress, they advance, they do quests or fulfill objectives, and those things give them more power or more items or better skills, and then they face bigger challenges, and those give bigger rewards. That's the core of an RPG type structure. GameLit encompasses RPG and a lot of other different types of things too. You could have RTS, real-time strategy, as literature. You could have first-person shooters as literature. Lots of different other types of games. Anything that was game-focused, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that nobody's done yet that we are still going to see in the future. Anything that's game-focused is GameLit. The other reason why GameLit was created originally was the term was coined because there were concerns about LitRPG trademarking stuff. And a bunch of the authors decided that they wanted to create their own term instead of LitRPG, just in case they were ever told you can't use LitRPG anymore, take down all your books. And so the GameLit was created as an alternate name because of the LitRPG trademark.
So they're worried that this might have turned into a Cockygate sort of affair.
This was Cockygate before Cockygate happened. Yes.
Oh my God! So who is the person who TM'd this?
LRM Kong.
Okay.
The name is vaguely familiar. I think I may have.
The author of The Land, a great series. It's the most famous, best known set of LitRPG books right now. Pretty much has been forever. And I've only read part of the series, but they're really good. And he has promised that he's never going to publicly promise that he's never going to use this to stop people from using the word LitRPG. He trademarked it to prevent a trademark troll from doing so. But it made enough people nervous that they started calling their stuff GameLit instead.
Okay. So he hasn't tried to enforce this?
No, he has not.
Okay. Interesting.
I can't say that I'm very intimately familiar with the readership of this, but I understand from being told by a number of authors that if you're writing lit RPG, you've got a very picky audience. You've got an audience that expects certain things in certain ways, and if they don't get it, they're pretty vocal about it. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it's true. I did I made some mistakes in my book. I made my character a little overpowered, and there were quite a few people who didn't like that. I had people tell me that they enjoyed the story, but that kind of turned them off.
Well, that happens in any kind of story, any kind of novel you can write. You can do something like that. Did any of the readers give you grief because it wasn't lit RPG enough, I guess is maybe a better way to phrase that. Like you don't have enough game mechanics. You don't have enough people reading the character screens. Something that is them saying, no, this is okay story, but it's not really lit RPG, being kind of militant about what lit RPG is. That's what I've heard, that some readers can be that way.
Yeah, I can't say I ran into that. I had quite a good amount of it in there.
I could certainly be wrong. I only hear from a couple of people, so I'm in a little echo chamber.
My stories, the Valhalla Online series, were pretty much lit RPG light, in that the game mechanics were a backdrop for the story. They were there to add some sense of where you were as you were watching the characters, go through their adventure. But I sort of added game mechanics where the character was running into them for the first time, and then they would gradually drop away to some degree. So that by the time the second and then the third book came around, there were less and less numbers being displayed on the page, and more following just the storyline as the character was adjusting to thinking about this as being the world, instead of reacting to each new encounter with a game mechanic as being something that was weird and jarring. I didn't have any complaints about it not being lit RPG enough. Even though by the time I got to the third book, it was definitely still happening in a game, and there were definitely still game mechanics present, but it was much more of a story in a game and less like little flashes of. You see a lot of books with like little flashes of a computer display, where it'll tell you, like, this has just happened with the compute, what you would see on your screen of a computer in a computer game, the lines of readout flashing by. I didn't add very much of that at all in the third book. And there was some of it in the first, a little less in the second, almost none in the third.
I don't hang out in the same places that authors that write lit RPG hang out, because I'm a science fiction author at this point. I haven't stuck my toe into the other water, but I've heard from a number of people that it's a pretty competitive sort of environment. And I've actually heard the word toxic tossed around, that there can be some nastiness in that. I don't want to mention any names of people because that's not really relevant to the discussion, but do you guys get the feeling that there's maybe some resistance in the genre to new people writing in it?
I think that all depends on where you hang out. I tend to stay away from groups like that, so all the groups that I'm currently in, everyone is pretty supportive of each other. And there's quite a few, so you can pick and choose.
It's like I said, I've only got a couple of people that I know that write in the genre, so I only hear a little bit about what's going on, and this may not be true. This may not be widespread. It's just me asking a question because I'm curious.
I didn't have any negative experiences with coming in. There was a little bit of, like, are you sure you're writing lit RPG? Because I entered early last year, right at the time when a whole bunch of people were all piling on. And a lot of the older lit RPG writers from the year before were kind of like, where are all you guys coming from? But if you told a good story and it was actually lit RPG and you were taking the time to read some of the other works and understand what readers were looking for, then they were really pretty welcoming pretty fast. Where it can get a little toxic, I think, is you're looking at a gamer environment. Gamers there are some awesome people in the gaming world, and there's also some people who use the anonymity of the online gaming world as an excuse to act as badly as they want to. The stuff about Gamergate, we're talking about Cockygate, there was Gamergate stuff not long before that. And, gamers can be brutal, vicious, really nasty people too. There's also some great people who play or in gaming.
Oh, sure. I absolutely do not want to tar and feather the entire genre of authors with that. I was just basically what you're saying there is there can be bad folk behaving badly.
Subset of the population, yes.
One of the things that I've noticed in reading all of these lit RPG books recently is, I don't know if it's just the ones that I've selected, but most of the characters, if not all of them, seem to be male. Most of the primary point of view characters. Is that a thing, or did I not find the ones that have women?
No, I think that's a thing. From what I understand, the books with women don't do as well as the books with men.
Well, damn it. That screws me because I love kick-ass women.
It's definitely a male character dominated genre. Most of the audience are male readers, and most of the audience are most of the books are kind of wish fulfillment type books. On the flip side, the Valhalla Online series has a female lead.
That's true. Yours is one of the ones that
interest, so it's not a romantic female lead. And it did pretty well. It did just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that it would be something that would stop me from writing it, because I wouldn't be writing a romance book. But the character that I have in mind is a female. So I still may eventually get there. It's trying to figure out where my schedule is going to be to make that happen.
Well, I think female characters have more staying power and more breadth of audience in the fantasy genre overall. So if you're writing a fantasy lit RPG and you want to be able to attract the overall fantasy audience, having a female lead is not actually a bad way to go.
Interesting. So there's that much of a difference between the subgenres, if it's a horror survival game or fantasy or whatever. And that's an interesting question for you guys. Are there horror survival lit RPG game lit books?
There are. There certainly are. One that comes to mind is Apocalypse Escapes by Daniel Shinoven, which is a really good series.
Is that the one where the characters are in a abandoned virtual world that used to have millions of players and is now almost empty?
No, this one is set like in far future, and the The main character, I believe, his consciousness was uploaded at some point and is now being used to entertain other people.
Oh, so that's awkward.
Yeah, he's put through a zombie apocalypse so people can watch and laugh at him.
Because I guess the other day I had this terrible idea where Isaac from Dead Space is aware of what's going on, and he's been killed every single way by the person basically controlling him, put him in there. They put him in situations where he's definitely going to die. There's no question about it. And so he's gotten used to it, but not really, because he still feels the pain every time it happens. Yeah. And then the DLC comes out. And so everything starts fresh. All his weapons are gone. He's back to zero. And now he's slugging through something that is altogether different and horrible.
DLC, what does that mean? Okay, well, if not the word, then what is this? What does the whole thing mean? What do you mean by DLC?
So I buy a game, and then a few months later, the developers come out with an add-on, which is another story. It's an expansion of the game.
I think it stands for downloadable content.
Maybe that's what it comes out to.
Yeah, that sounds right.
All right, that's what it is. But that's what I've always seen it as.
All right, well, that's fine. See, that's one of the things that I've seen as an obstacle for me writing something in LitRPG is because I'm not an online role player. I've looked up some of the lists of terms that are used by online role playing in these, and I'm like, yeah, if I'm going to trip up somewhere, it's going to be the fact that I don't play anything like World of Warcraft.
Yeah, you need to get educated. You probably need to go watch some playthroughs or something like that to get an idea of what it's like being an actual player.
I figure it's all like Leroy Jenkins.
But it is not Leroy Jenkins.
You know what Leroy Jenkins was?
Oh, you waited for me to explain this? This was an early recording of some gamers play. I don't know which game that they were playing, but a bunch of players were going through the numbers trying to figure out how they were going to attack this particular dungeon, while the character Leroy Jenkins, the player Leroy Jenkins, was off getting something to eat. And he came back in the middle of their thing and just said, "Let's do this, Leroy Jenkins," and runs into the dungeon. And then everybody goes in to try to save him, and they all die horribly. And they're all cussing him.
The whole thing was staged.
Was it? Oh, you've ruined it for me.
It's one of the best known memes on the internet that, yes, it was World of Warcraft, and the whole thing was staged by the players who did it. It is an incredibly, the videos, I have no idea how many plays it's had at this point. But yeah, it's a major MMO meme. And like Ready Player One brought in all of this stuff from old games, if you're wanting to bring in things that actual gamers are going to understand and be like, oh yeah, I know what that's referring to, it might actually be a good idea to go and play a game for a little bit.
Yeah. Or you have a character who suddenly drops shots. Even though it's a fantasy game, they drop shot.
Mm-hmm. Or
from COD. Yeah.
What's a tank?
Depends on which game.
As far as from having read a couple of dozen of these books, a tank is your frontline fighter that can take the damage and deal it out.
Yeah, it's mostly about soaking, not about dealing it out.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Tanks are about collecting aggro. Aggro is the aggression level of the NPCs that you're fighting. So you don't want the NPCs that you're fighting to go and hit your squishy people. So tanks tend to be very good at collecting the attention, the aggro of the monsters, and soaking up the damage so that they don't die.
So your cleric can res you after you're dead.
Right. Your heavy hitters who are squishy that you don't want. Glass cannon, that's another word that you'll see used in RPG and gaming.
Interesting.
It honestly sounds like I'm probably more suited to writing GameLit than LitRPG, because I'll undoubtedly run into something game mechanics wise that I shouldn't have run into if I try to be too specific.
I think it's very, very simple. You ask the gaming community or go look at these walkthroughs and you'll get an idea of the kind of mechanics that are there. I mean, there's a whole industry of players out there who make money just by playing the game and broadcasting it.
Well, honestly, though, it doesn't sound like, being GameLit as opposed to LitRPG is a bad thing. It's just different. It's maybe a little bit more broad of a canvas to tell a story on.
I agree. I think that there's a lot of different room for expansion and room for different types of gaming to fall into that GameLit umbrella. As far as like knowing how to do this stuff, what would you do if you were writing a science fiction book, and you didn't know anything about the type of science you were about to use?
I'd do research.
Right.
Absolutely.
And then you'd probably run it by somebody who did know.
I already have a first reader lined up that is a very big online game player to vet what I was writing. So I've already got that angle covered.
And there you go. Really, that's the primary thing. If you're telling a good story and you're not making any major faux pas, I think you're probably fine.
I can tell you, Terry, as a fellow pantser, the game mechanics, planning all that out was really challenging.
In what ways?
So I'd reach a spot where it's time to insert game mechanics and incorporate changes, point skill upgrades, point upgrades. And then I have to go back and find the old stuff. And then I had to make an Excel document to start keeping track of it all. It was difficult.
This sounds like one of these deals like a Rainbow Six Siege. They put out a new character and they're constantly rebalancing the characters. So a character you love may get nerfed, right? Or a character you love who's always getting shot to shit, they may rebalance them. I can imagine that would be a game mechanic in this where they put out a patch to the game and suddenly the character has been kicking ass. That item has gotten nerfed.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
You can do the same thing with spells or whatever else. And that I think that would be absolutely hilarious. The patch comes out, they're in the middle of a battle, and suddenly that item like loses half of its value or any of those mechanics. I think it'd be hilarious.
There was one particular book that I was reading where they were, I think it was called Gamer for Life, and it was basically the story of a prisoner being put into these RPGs to test long-term immersion. And every once in a while, they'd pull the character out and basically rebalance the game a little bit. They'd make changes to it and make global announcements, but they'd log everybody off. So you might come back and find that certain things that people were doing, you can't do that anymore.
Or they fix a glitch you've been using to stay alive.
Stuff along those lines.
Yeah, see that. I love that idea of the mechanic where the there's literally gods out there who are just messing with the game constantly update. I mean, what happens when they're all stuck on a server together and half the network goes down and suddenly the world starts getting all weird? Stuff like that. I think those would be really, really fascinating mechanics to include in those games. It's giving me way too many ideas.
Another thing that happens a lot in these various books seems to be that the gods in the world are actually the AIs controlling the game. And they sometimes have their own agendas that they're pushing, and they're dragging some of the players along with them. And that's always fun to watch.
I'm reminded of the South Park episode where they're the MMORPG episode. Are you guys familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
That episode? Yeah. There's one player out there who's basically like leveled up so high that they're killing everybody, or they have killed everybody. And so the boys start farming sheep for what is it, like 2 weeks or something, to get enough power to do something and take them out. It's absolutely funny as hell because the game devs are in there rooting for them, collecting special items for them, all that kind of thing. So I guess I really should have put that together. That's what this is, essentially.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I like it.
I mean, there's
Cartman's mom in the bedpan.
Do what now?
Without Cartman's mom in the bedpan.
Yeah, and the bedpans. Oh, it was so disgusting. Oh my god! Like day 28, they haven't showered.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Kevin?
There's a lot of breadth to it too. Like in Alarin Kong's The Land, the character's actually transported to essentially another dimension that happens to be a game world type thing. So it's not all an MMORPG. It's just the character is in a reality which has RPG mechanics at its core. So there are different constructs for how that happened. Valhalla Online, it is a virtual world. It's uploaded consciousnesses to people who were worried that there was no afterlife, whose consciousnesses are uploaded to a computer system as a digital afterlife.
Wow.
Looking back at again, I'm going to touch on the differences between GameLit and LitRPG. What kind of additional breadth of storytelling do you see that GameLit has that might not be available in LitRPG?
I think LitRPG is limited to just the types of games that are available. So we could see a Terry Mixon Monopoly GameLit game.
Oh my God, let's not see that one.
I'm waiting for Munchkin, the book, Yeah. I'm waiting for the Munchkin novel.
I guess where I'm getting that is, are there stories that can't be told in LitRPG that might be possible to be told in GameLit because it may be a little bit of a wider canvas, I guess is how let me rephrase the question that way.
Well, I've just started a book by Nick Cole, Soda Pop Soldier, which he's calling it LitRPG, but it feels more like a broader GameLit sort of thing from what I've read so far. It feels much more kind of first-person shootery. And the game mechanics sound like a first-person shooter type game. But it compelling story, interesting stuff going on in the world. And I think at the core, that's really what's most important. The different types of games are just different modes of telling a good story.
Yeah, I think that's true in anything that we're writing. It's just trying to, since the genres are so new and I'm not a gamer, it's trying to figure out, what's one and what's the other. And it's going to be an ongoing process for me figuring out exactly what the difference is. Because even in the genre itself, I suspect there's differences of opinion of what's LitRPG versus what's GameLit.
Very much so.
Yeah, I can completely see that. So basically what you're telling me is the definition has to have this, but other than that, it's pretty much all over the place. Has to have game mechanics and that kind of thing, and that's pretty much what you have to put the story into.
Yeah, and I mean, like, everyone's going to agree that Ready Player One is GameLit. Some people are going to say it's not really LitRPG because of the lack of progression, although it was a good point about the progression being the viewers. The movie itself was probably not at all LitRPG, but was definitely still GameLit. There's a lot of blurry line stuff in this. People have discussed a lot of older books, and is this GameLit? Is this not? Is this LitRPG? Is this not? And at the end of the day, I think that there's a huge blurry line, and readers are mostly after a good story.
We were talking how these genres have only actually had these names for a couple of years now, and how there's been a surge of writers coming into them over the last year or two. It'll be interesting to see what they look like in another 2 years when, just like other genres, they've had a flood of people coming in because they've seen success for other people in these genres, and they want to go ahead and see if they can do the same. And I remember how much it changed other genres as people flooded into it and glutted the market, and then we see what happens. There's still a lot of good stories out there, but the environment's going to be totally different, I suspect, in a couple of 3 years inside of LitRPG and GameLit.
So what books should we read if we're trying to get a good expanse of the breadth and width of this? I mean, obviously your books, but and obviously
the Valhalla Online books were excellent, and we await the next one.
Uh-oh.
I have to agree with that.
Terry just dropped it on the table. He just flopped the glove down. Next time he's going to slap you with it. That's how this works.
Oh.
It's coming out late summer.
Late summer. Okay. Linton, your book is called?
My book is called The Quest, Last Gods, Book 1.
Okay. Have plans for book 2?
There are plans for book 2. However, it was my first book, and I kind of want to establish myself as a multi-genre author. So I'm putting out books in other genres before I get to the next one.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough. So
inside the wider audience, which books are your favorites?
There's some of the big ones that are big for a reason, like Awaken Online is a really good series.
I'm actually listening to the first book in Awaken Online right now. That's my current read. I'm liking it a lot.
Yeah, it's really good. Now that I'm under your gun, my brain just went blank.
Kevin mentioned The Land. So
Yeah.
I've got the first book of that sitting in my Audible library as well. I just haven't gotten to it.
So it sounds like there's good stuff out there. And of course, we mentioned Ready Player One. I guess if you turn Neuromancer into a video game, it would be the same kind of thing.
Yeah, that's less virtual though. It's mostly real world.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying if you changed it to that.
If I had to toss in my recommendation, I think it would be the Trapped Mind project. It's been one of the ones I've enjoyed the most thus far, even though it's a little quirky. I enjoyed it.
The Way of the Shaman is a really good series. It's by a Russian author. It's been around for a little while. It's up to like 7 books, I believe.
It seems like LitRPG has actually got a number of Russian authors. I think I read somewhere that it was very popular in Russia. And I'm not sure why.
My understanding is that it was actually big over there before it became a thing here.
I know I've read 7 books in a series by an author named D. Russ that I think he was the first person that I actually read a LitRPG book. And I can't remember what the series was now, but it was good, but I think it got away from him, and I think that's why he's writing other things now. His storyline got away from him.
Don't you hate it when that happens? When you have to use a bullwhip to bring everything back in? Yeah.
It could be done. He could bring it back in, but he's writing other things now, so maybe he'll come back. It's been a couple of years since he wrote a novel in that particular series.
Oh, boy.
What are your guys' advice to anyone like me who's thinking about dipping their toe into the water of either GameLit or LitRPG?
I think one of the things you should consider is making sure that you label it correctly. If you're going to use LitRPG, make sure that it fits with what the readers expect with the level progression or some sort of progression system.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I would say have some kind of experience with the genre or gaming or both. I didn't read a lot of LitRPG before I started writing them. I only read a couple, but I have played. I mean, I played like 10 different MMORPGs when I was younger, and helped develop a couple of them. And so I had a lot of background experience with gaming, with online gaming in general, which made it easy for me to put that stuff in the story. If you don't have that kind of background, a lot of gaming background, I'd read a lot of books because that'll give you a feel for what people are writing about. And you sounds like you've done that, Terry. The other piece of just one random piece of advice here is create a character sheet for your main character if you're writing LitRPG, and update it as you go. I didn't do that at first, and then I started doing it, and it became so much easier because then I could just like cut and paste stats when the person leveled and new stats, the stats were changed. I would just make the adjustment on the sheet, cut and paste, put it into the story, into the narrative, and keep on going.
Do you think that there's less need to have specific MMORPG experience if you're writing in the wider GameLit type of genre? You can be a little bit more fast and loose, maybe, I guess, with the rules?
I would think so, yeah.
Because it honestly sounds like the way that I would write the story, I know how I write. I suspect I would not be a strictly LitRPG person. GameLit may be a better fit for me and my writing style.
I think that if you label it as GameLit, I don't think you're going to have a problem with that. And this goes back to what Linton was saying about reader expectations. If you put on LitRPG, then they're going to expect all that. Put it in GameLit, maybe not.
Yeah, if you put it as GameLit, from a marketing perspective, put it in as GameLit, but use LitRPG as one of your keywords on KDP. Anyway, because there's a lot of overlap in the audience. But when they come to the book and it says a GameLit novel instead of a LitRPG novel, they'll know what they're looking at. They'll know that, this may not be exactly LitRPG. And if they are okay with that, they'll buy it. Likewise, you could still target major LitRPG authors because LitRPG authors are still bigger than GameLit the genre name LitRPG is still the larger and more powerful one right now.
Okay. All right. Good.
That makes total sense.
So Terry, now your fears should be assuaged.
We'll see about that. There's been happenings that are going on with some authors that have been recently banned by Amazon that I don't know that it's connected to the fact that they wrote LitRPG, but it's peculiar that I know 3 specific individuals that have gotten banned, and they're all connected in some way with LitRPG. It still makes me nervous. When you're a Kindle Unlimited author, you kind of are cautious about putting your career on the line like that. So we'll see. I may wait a year to write this novel, let things shake up a little bit more before I stick my face into that buzzsaw. But I definitely think that I'll take the advice that I've gotten and just deal with writing the books and not try to get inside the community of authors, because I don't need to get bound up in the authors. I need to be focused on what the readers think. That's really what I care about.
That's where I would focus too. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that if LitRPG is a big flash right now, maybe a little bit less of a flash right now than it was a year ago, but in 2 years it may be still strong, or it might be fading out and fizzling. So, like one of the things that I've done is I've written LitRPG books, which will also have great appeal to a wider audience. You don't want to write a book that's just going to appeal to the LitRPG crowd that no one else will ever read because there's so many pages of text about game mechanics. I would like to have a book that appeals to the LitRPG audience that also has lasting appeal to a broader audience in fantasy or science fiction or whatever your major genre is.
All right, guys. We've been here talking this almost an hour. I want to thank you both for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it. If you would, go ahead and share with our viewers where they can find you and find your works.
We'll say the best for last. So I'm Linton Bowers, and you can find me, search on Amazon. You can also find me on Facebook or lintonbowers.com. And that's about it.
I'm Kevin McLaughlin. My website's kevinomclaughlin.com, and most of my books are in Kindle Unlimited right now, so easy to find them on Amazon, print or ebook, and free if you've got KU. So take a look.
All right, folks, if you've got something you'd like to share about this topic, you've got questions, you've got comments, go ahead and send us a note at show@deadrobotsociety.com. Or find us on Facebook at the Listeners of the Dead Robot Society on Facebook. I'd like to go ahead and point out that we have our patrons on patreon.com/DRS podcast. You can get our videos at youtube.com/DRS podcast. And you can get the audio versions at podhoster. We have to thank podhoster.com. And if you want to find us on Twitter, you can find Paul at Paul_E_Cooley. And Paul, who are our $10 patrons this week?
Our $10 patrons this week are Sue, You're Writing What Now, Bayman, J.D. Barker, Kelson Von Deal, Isabel Cushy, Rick Shaw, Lisa Slack, Sandy Manpants, Cheryl Winters, Tracy Bodine, John Kilgallen, Devin Lee, Nathan is out of ideas petty. I'm so shocked. Chris Winder, Andre Conde Moraes, DJ Chamberlain, and J.R. Handley.
Thank you very much, folks, for supporting the show. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
And Linton, Kevin, thank you very much for coming on and talking with us. We appreciate that a lot.
Got you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
See ya.
Bye, guys.